by the military-industrial complex.
It could be seen to move violently forward, violently forward, violently forward.
I'm just a patsy.
Let's win there.
I said this once or twice, but it bears repeating. If you like your current insurance, you will keep your current insurance.
You think about the Army and the Navy and the missions they run to protect the world, they run on SAP.
Well, you have done a really spectacular job. I guess pretty much everybody at this table is your customer, so that's not so bad.
Exactly.
So I want to congratulate
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Everybody at this table is your customer. And we're back. How you doing, Courtney?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm pleased as punch to be here with you today.
Likewise.
So how is the weather treating you in Tennessee today?
Today is pretty nice. It's like a little bit breezy, kind of fall. I just got back. I was in New Orleans. I was speaking at the, they called it MAGA Fest, but yeah, so I was just there and just got back this morning, actually. So
and what is the MAGA Fest, pray tell?
So it was interesting. I think it was supposed to be a few weeks ago, but because of the storm, it got postponed. So I think the event was not quite what it would have been, but it was like a group had been doing it, and then another group kind of came in because to help take over. I think some people dropped out. I don't know. It became like a collective kind of a conference, and there were, I think, 40 speakers. It was a lot, but yeah, it was. But they were great because there in Louisiana, they did a bill. It was one of the first to box out any jurisdiction of the WHO, the World Economic Forum, and the UN in the state. So they're patriots. They're really, I think, doing some good stuff there.
Yeah, I was talking to my wife this morning because I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this show today is because you and I have been friends for a while. We both came from the same place, and but we don't always agree. And sometimes I think that floating our differences is good. It clears the air and stuff. And one of the differences that I think that you and I have is about voting. I still live in the People's Republic of California, where I don't believe that my vote actually counts for anything. So, but if you're in a place where voting actually does seem to have some kind of an impact, I guess it's still a valid activity.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on this. So first and foremost, I will say that I can't prove this, but there are a lot of data points that point in this direction, and so it is speculative. But it looks to me like there is a very concerted, active measure convincing people not to vote, that they have no power. There are different variations of the same narrative. I personally, on more than I can count on both hands, know directly people who have said, I won't name names, but that they were going to vote, and then they listened to so-and-so, and they've now decided that they won't vote. And of course, who were all of those people going to vote for? I would look at the result, like, who does this benefit? None of them were going to vote for Kamala. We'll just say that. So it does look to me very interesting. The people who are parroting this narrative also, promulgate narratives that have a very demoralizing and destabilizing kind of an impact and are very anti-American sentiment. So that's first and foremost. I will say I do think there is an active measure to convince people that they have no power, they should not vote. And that, of course, typically will benefit Kamala, the left. It will benefit the left. So I think that's interesting and worth noting. I will also say this, even if, I mean, I've read Carol Quigley. I understand, like, the whole claim that the CFR has selected our supposed candidates, and that they really, decide it's basically like a rigged boxing game, and we have actually no real power in our vote. I've read that, and I understand, and I think there is an element of truth in it. However, if you're watching a crime occur, let's say you're watching some people rob a bank, and let's say I'm watching them rob this bank, and I'm a relatively small female, and it's a bunch of pretty burly armed men who, and I have no means of combating them. So is my just watching it and saying, oh, well, there's a crime happening, oops, I'm just going to sit back and do nothing, is that the answer? Probably not. And so I think that they are counting on apathy and abolition, because just the sheer act of taking patriots out of the equation so that they don't do anything is, I think that has a lot of power. I think that they can say, oh, well, yeah, it was so obvious. So I think
Your audio is cutting out there a little bit.
No. Okay.
I have a couple of thoughts on that.
Okay.
The first is I don't think that not voting and the assumption that because you're not voting, you're throwing your arms up in the air and not doing anything about it is necessarily true. And the way that I think about it is that once I unregistered to vote, again, I'm in California.
Right.
I don't even know what conservative means. I believe in life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal in the Bill of Rights. That's where I'm at. And
that's what I did my speech on this weekend. Yeah.
And so whoever is for that, that's who I'm with, right?
Right.
So, but the thing is that if you continue to participate in a process that's rigged against you, assuming that you're going to have a different outcome, and there's a unnecessary psychological effect of that, which is that I tried by casting my vote as opposed to doing something else. So in between the not doing anything and giving into the system and casting your vote, there's a whole spectrum of things that you could do. So, for example, you said that if people don't vote, it's going to help Kamala Harris. One of the things that I found out when I unregistered to vote is that you have to fill out a form, just like you fill out a form when you register to vote. They have a form. I went to the Los Angeles County Registrar of Voters, and I downloaded it, and I printed it out, and I signed it, and I had to mail it in. And then later I got a confirmation, that I had unregistered to vote. So one of the things that I was thinking of, I live in the Pacific Palisades. In the village, they have a farmer's market every weekend. And this is the time of year when there's two card tables set up. There's a Republican card table and there's a Democrat card table, and they're all trying to register people to vote. Sure. And my thought was, I thought it would be funny. This would be kind of like a Fleckus-like video to print out a bunch of forms to unregister to vote and then stand in between the two card tables with a clipboard and somebody shooting a video and asking people if they wanted to unregister to vote. Because, of course, in California, everybody's going to assume that when you're doing that you're for Trump, right? Because the assumption is that there's nobody in California who would vote for Trump. So right. so I don't know. So and in doing something like that, you'd create a video. The video might go out on the internet. Somebody might pick it up, and it becomes a thing. But at a certain point, it just gets to I want to believe that our American Republic is a real thing, and that it's functional, and that it stands for all of the things that I learned in school that it stands for. But I just take a look around the world, and that's not what I see. And I'm sorry about that. because I really want it to be like that. But I do think that when I unregistered to vote, it changed my mindset about a lot of things. For example, and a lot of people will cringe when I say this, and I don't know that this is true. Okay, but when somebody took a shot at Donald Trump, there's somebody who follows my channel who has a thesis, and he has what he thinks is evidence that there might have been a blood pack under Trump's hat. Now, in order for this thesis to be true, 3 innocent people will still have to die in the inaction of this school play, as it were. But there was a moment in time when I was registered to vote where I wouldn't have even considered that. Like I'm not saying that it's true right now.
Right.
But when I unregistered to vote and I started looking at the way that different types of information are being presented out there, it changed my frame. It changed my mindset a little bit. So, go on.
No, I was just going to say I can understand that, and I think I'm in a different place because I recognize those things, and I've been looking at that for a long time. But I still feel like we need to take action. The only way to restore any kind of semblance of the Declaration of Independence, of the Bill of Rights, is for us to operate on the civics that were set up in that framework. So I'm a very big proponent of creating parallel systems, but you can't create a parallel system and just ignore the main system. I think you still have to fight within that system. So to me, if you just walk away, and I understand, like doing a video of showing that you're not voting, I mean, you're making a public statement there. That's a very different thing. Most of the people who are just opting out are like, oh, I'm powerless, and it's just abolition, it's apathy. And that's a very different place. That's a great place for people who are trying to foment a color revolution, to have people operating from that mindset. The mindset you're operating from is a little bit different, but that's not where most people who are now fed this narrative that, oh, my vote has no power, are coming from. And when you talk about it in California, that's really funny, because I remember when Trump won, and I went to an aerial class that night, and this was right after being at Barney's, and I went over to aerial, and they literally did like a seance, and they were all crying, and this is big, and the teacher leads them in holding hands, and we'll do
but that's what Ben and Jeremy were doing that night.
I know. Yeah, that too. And I said, excuse me, I think this is very poor business for you to assume that everyone in this room is crying at this moment. And whether I agree or disagree with your politics, I have paid to take this class, not to do a seance for Hillary. It was really interesting. The reaction was stunned, like, oh my gosh, there's somebody who isn't like crying over the fact that Hillary isn't our, world leader. And they were really in shock. But she did hear me. She said, "You're right. That is, you paid to be here. We should have a class." I'm sorry. But
that's California, right?
Yeah.
I was going to the gym this morning too, and I was riding my bike down the street, and I did see a woman like walking down the street with a Kamala book bag, on her shoulder, and I was just wondering, how do these people? Again, the whole idea of democracy. Kamala Harris didn't win one primary ever, and these people are all kind of gung ho. I live on a street that's got 2 or 3 bundlers. There's probably 2 or 3 bundlers that live within 100 yards of me.
Wow.
And they've
You're
got their
removed from reality.
Yeah, I just nobody's going to nuke my neighborhood, I don't think. I mean, although they do all have bunkers now. Most of the new houses that have gone in the Palisades in the last 3 or 4 years have double basements. Like they buy a lot and then they dig. And you grew up in California. You know, the basements have never really been a thing, but like digging down 40 feet into the ground under your house is something that that I haven't seen. I haven't seen in a while. Anyway, one of the other things that you and I get we have a tete-a-tete on Twitter about is language. I'll just say language, and I started to try to read one of your Twitter threads this morning because I think when I looked at it, I thought this has got a lot of really important information in it, and I really want to read it. And it's funny because when I ran into this problem before, I quoted McLuhan. And another friend of yours, Christine Jones, she the Palmer worm, she started asking me whether or not I'd ever read McLuhan and what did I know about McLuhan and all this other stuff. And I know quite a bit about McLuhan. I don't claim to know everything about McLuhan, but I did understand the medium is the message idea that he had, which is that Twitter is for tweets, right. And when we're trying to communicate with different audiences, and that's the name of the show that I named the show today, Who's Our Audience? Right. That maybe one of the things that we should clear the air on is my concept of the effect of information and what it is that we're trying to do. And people who have followed me on the show for a while have heard me go through this idea, this kind of pyramid structure of the way that journalism used to be organized, which was on the bottom level, you had researchers. You had people who went to the libraries and they filed FOIAs, and they weren't the journalists. They were kind of the staff at the newspaper and stuff who worked for the reporters or with the reporters.
They were the researchers.
In the research department, right? Yeah. And then you had reporters, and the reporters would have to take all of the research, and they'd go out and they'd interview people, and then they would synthesize that stuff. Right. But the reporters were tasked by editors, and the editors would edit their stuff. They would look at it, and they would actually make it fit into the size of the newspaper, right? Because you had a certain number of words, right, that you had to make something fit in. Yeah. And then above them, you had the publishers, and the publishers were the ones who had to make sure that the thing was making money and everybody was getting paid and distribution was happening.
Advertisers were happy, and
right. And in the world of citizen journalism, we've all had to kind of wear all of those hats.
Wear all the hats
at the same time, and so I think that. One of the artifacts of that, one of the things that winds up happening is that we lose our reference point a little bit, and I know that you and Christine operate at what I would refer to as a high academic level. Like you're regularly talking to each other on Twitter in what I would refer, you and James Lindsay, at like a master's degree or PhD level of communication. And I get it and I understand it. And there's a lot of shorthand that you guys use because there's a lot of common understanding that you have about things. But as a third-party person who's coming in and jumping in the conversations and then looking around and trying to understand what's going on, I find myself lost a lot. And I don't think I'm dumb.
No,
and
I know you're not.
Yeah. So where my comments are coming from is the idea that, and there's a guy named Evan Brown who follows me on Twitter and used to work at the Daily Wire, was a writer there, and he's an ad man. And we had a Zoom call a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about it. And he pointed out very eloquently, like this is all about audience. This is all about determining who your audience is. And I know that when you and James and Christine are talking to each other, you guys have shorthand, and you're all kind of talking back and forth. But getting back to the if we're going to fix the Republic kind of what's the word, problem that we're trying to solve.
It is a problem.
Then I have started to wonder recently, putting it in the frame of Evan Brown, which is, who is our audience? Like, who are we talking to? And if we're not talking to the people that we want to target, how can we approach those people, and how can we get them to understand what it is that we're talking about? And and that's where I think GPT actually does wind up becoming a really valuable tool, because you can take a sophisticated piece of work that somebody has done, and you can re-engineer the language in it so that you can aim it at other people.
I've seen James do that a few times recently with Grok. But,
James has been doing it with Grok. I play with Grok. It's interesting because I have Grok and I have GPT, and I use one, and there's other ones. There's Claude. There's Facebook has one out.
Pilot. I think Mike Adams has one too. I haven't played with his, but
yeah, they're all a little different. I still think that, and I think of ChatGPT as Netscape. Okay. We all remember when Netscape was the king, right? And it was like, and nobody was going to beat Netscape, and Netscape was going to take over the world. And now we don't know what Netscape is, right?
Right.
So I do kind of think of ChatGPT as Netscape, but
that's a fair analogy. Yeah.
But they all have they're all kind of nuanced, right? Yeah. And one of the things, I had Matthew Crawford on my show last week, and
he's great.
And we went through GPT, and we went through a couple of what I call them super prompts. One of the things that GPT in the last 6 months has significantly gotten better. A year ago, I couldn't put a chapter into it and have it do much with it, but now I can put an entire book into it, and it will do all kinds of things. And so I've, on my channel, for people who subscribe to my Substack or my Buy Me a Coffee, there are prompts that I've created that I call super prompts. And you could just take a book in there and paste the super prompt in there, and it will go through and it will build an FAQ. It'll build a list of all the important people. It'll build a list of all the locations, all the organizations, a timeline, a bibliography, a glossary, and then an executive summary of the book. And I find, and those are what I've been publishing on my Substack, a lot of them. And I don't have an illusion about who I'm making those for. I think that I'm making them for other researchers. And I think that the reason that Matthew Crawford and I connected so quickly after I started publishing those things is he immediately saw how what I was doing supported his research program. Sure. So, but likewise, I mean, I think that there are ways that we can use that stuff to tailor our messaging. And so I'm not trying to say that I think that James Lindsay is wrong, because I don't. I don't think he's wrong, but I do. But I am. I guess the thing that I respond to more than anything else is what I'm perceiving as emotion turning into energy, that's turning into tweets that seem to be like yelling at the ocean, kind of. You know what I mean? It's like, these people are all so stupid, they don't get it. And it's like, it reminds me of I actually have a soundbite from the movie Dangerous Liaisons, and so that I don't forget it. Let me pull it up here. I think I can do it on my little what happened on my little box here. Yeah, here it is. Here's Glenn Close. Let me see if it works.
Dangerous Liaison.
Yeah, like.
Great movie.
Yeah, like most intellectuals, he's intensely stupid, says Glenn Close in that movie. I don't think that James Lindsay is intensely stupid, but
I would agree. He's not.
he's not. But or maybe I should say, I'm using hypnosis. The idea is that bringing it back to our audience is that who's he talking to when he's screaming, and because I'm clearly being misunderstood, and I think that it's the medium is the message kind of thing, because I'm trying to have a conversation with Twitter, and I'm coming in the middle of a conversation. Okay.
So I have a couple of things to say on this. I think what you're raising, I understand exactly what you're saying. I've heard this many times. I've actually been asked several times. James knows this, so I'm not like sharing something. I've talked to him about this. People have said, like, you should do James Lindsay for dummies. And of course, I've actually been brought on to several shows where they're like, okay, can you like water this down? Like, I'm 5 and do James Lindsay for dummies. And I've attempted this, and then I've had people tell me that they literally have to sit there with a dictionary to understand me. So apparently I've failed miserably at this task. I apologize. But this is what I'm realizing. And I've actually talked to him. I said, I'd be willing, I wouldn't do it without his permission, but I'd be willing to take on a project like that if that's something you were okay with, if you think it's of value. But my concern with him, and I've had this conversation with him, telling him that my concern with him is part of what we're experiencing. There is an element of jargon that happens. I mean, just like you were in the tech sphere, you understand like certain, there's jargon in technology that I'm not versed in, that would look like I'm reading another language when people do code. And, that's something, it takes a bit of training and expertise in order to be familiarized with that jargon. And then that language becomes, like your regular language. You become very versed in it, and it's not, so it doesn't become esoteric any longer. You understand it. And that's the same with, unfortunately, because of our education system, first and foremost, just our general vernacular has been dumbed down to the degree where most people are not capable of what should be 4th grade reading level. And I don't say this to be pejorative, derogatory. This is a fact. I share the story all the time because I was so shocked by it. I was really astounded. I had sent something from the Anti-Federalists to a bunch of friends. And I'm a big fan of the Anti-Federalists. I thought I'm more in favor of them than the Federalists. And I was reading through some of it, and I was like, oh, this is exciting. And I had shared in response to a conversation that was on a thread. And I responded with like a quote from them. And what I received in return was a realization that these people, who I would argue are erudite, most of them had college degrees, if not advanced graduate degrees, and either way, these are not people I think of as being dumb people. But we live in a soundbite culture, and our education has done them such a disservice. They literally could not comprehend that text. They thought they did, but they really didn't. I could tell by the response that I received, the reactions to it. And this was 4th grade reading level for the, at the time. And it is obviously not anymore, because people were not, people who have gone through the graduate and advanced degrees could not.
That was before TikTok.
That was long before TikTok. Yeah, we now live in soundbite culture. But here's my concern. So we could do this where we play into, we cater to the lowest denominator. I wrote an article, this was back in 2020. It's on my website. It says 2021, but I actually wrote it in 2020. And, we shifted everything over when I built my website. So that's what it says. But it was on critical race theory. And I remember I had my mom, who I would argue is also not a stupid person. She has a PhD. So she's also educated. And my mom read it and told me, Courtenay, I don't understand half of this. Like, this needs to be dumbed down because people aren't going to know what you're saying. I went through it 4 times, and it, did what I thought was a dumbing down of the lexicon. And then I finally got to a point where we agreed, okay, this was presentable and maybe some people, it will be intelligible to some. And then there was one word she said, you have to take this out. And I said, oh, what is it? And it turned out the word was dialectic. And I said, Mom, that's the entire crux of my article. Like, that is not negotiable. If I take it out, there's no point in my writing this article. And so I left it in. But this shows you where we're at. And so I wrestle with it because this isn't about James or, the pommel worm. This is about a much bigger problem where, okay, we can cater to people, but then we're feeding into the problem. And I've had personal friends tell me that on my podcast, they sit with a dictionary. And my first reaction was, oh my goodness, I felt bad. I'm not trying to make things difficult. And I often consciously try to dumb down my language in order to make it accessible. But I also think that there is work that needs to be done. And I want to give something, the way to educate people is to require that you don't give people fish, you teach them to fish, right? So there needs to be an element of people doing the work. When I was a little kid, I insisted, when I was 7 years old, I remember this so well, my parents never had dinner together. I insisted we have dinner as a family. It lasted maybe a year, but I don't even think that long. But I insisted on it. And do you know what my reason for insisting on this was? My parents had a very expansive vocabulary, and I loved hearing them talk because I always learned from them. And I would always ask them, what does that mean? What does that mean? And my dad would never tell me what it meant. He would insist I run upstairs, I get the dictionary. Not only would I have to get the dictionary because I was the YYY kid, I would say to my dad, but where did that word come from? The etymology of the word. So my dad got me an etymology encyclopedia, and I would have to run upstairs, get that book, and have to look through it. But you know what? I learned those words, and I didn't forget how to use them. And I looked forward to every night at dinner. There was going to be conversation where I'd be lost, but I would learn through that process. So now I recognize I was a very strange kid. And I may be a very strange adult. I'm okay with that. And I really, truly love to learn. And I love, language and vocabulary and all of that. It's fun for me. But I also recognize that process can be arduous, but it is necessary because that jargon was created for a reason. Now, sometimes jargon is just, I think it can be superfluous, and it can be limiting, and it can create kind of a bubble when it doesn't serve, where it no longer serves a purpose. But sometimes it really is because it's describing, we were talking about like philosophical concepts. And because of our education system, we now have this liberal arts, generic liberal arts. It's lost the real meaning of what liberal arts was supposed to encompass. I mean, it was supposed to be about teaching the classics, and It was supposed to be a foundational education. Now it's, gender studies and whatever, studying, furries or whatever it is these days. I don't know. I know. But, it's become so watered down and so ludicrous, really, that we've lost the meaning of what. But true liberal arts education, if you were a philosophy major, you had to take symbolic logic. You had to take rhetoric. You had to build that foundational layer so that you had the cognitive liberty, and you had the cognitive, the critical thinking tools that were necessary to investigate, so that you wouldn't study calculus if you didn't know basic arithmetic, right? You had the tools, the basic foundational mathematical principle before you engage in something like calculus. Philosophy is the same way. And so everybody wants like a one-word soundbite for something that is kind of, you do need to have some foundational principles before you jump into the deep water. You need to learn how to swim before you go into the deep end. So all that to say, I struggle with this because that's really what you're addressing. It's a much bigger problem. And yes, I'd like to reach a wider audience because I think people are capable of learning, but you can't water it down so much that you've lost the meaning and you've lost the ability for people to figure it out for themselves.
Yeah, I get it. I'm reminded
Sorry,
as
that was a very long rant, but
no. I was taking notes. It's fine. I like letting you talk. One of my critiques of watching your show is occasionally you'll have guests who don't actually understand who they're talking to when they come onto your show, and they talk at you. As if you don't have any context. And I wind up turning the podcast off or throwing things at my computer.
Oh, no.
Because I'm saying, why don't talk to her like that? Anyway, I'm reminded, though, of a situation. I got hired by Virgin. I worked for Virgin for 5 years. I ran the internet. My title was Director of the Web when they hired me. Because I was a technology guy and I knew something about computers, on the second or third day that I was working in there, they brought me into a meeting with some guys who were putting a new telephone system into the building. And that they thought that because I ran the internet that I should be in charge of deciding what the phone system was going to be. I thought that I thought that should be the operations director's job, not the internet guy. But anyway, I was sitting in the meeting and these telephone guys were using all this telephone jargon. And I know all the internet jargon.
Sure.
I don't know any of the telephone jargon.
Right.
Okay. And they're using all of this jargon. And I kept stopping the conversation and having people explain things to me. At a certain point, I reached back behind me. There was an armoire behind me, and I reached back and I grabbed this empty basket and I put it in the middle of the table. And I said, "I'm the client, right?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'm in charge. I'm the guy that you're trying to get sign the PO, right?" And they said, "Yeah." And I go, "Here's the rules. If you use an acronym in this meeting and everybody at this table doesn't know what the acronym is, then you have to put $1 in the basket." Mm-hmm. And the conversation got very stilted because these people were almost incapable of speaking without using jargon. And at one point, one of the guys got so frustrated that he said, "Oh, screw it." And he reached into his wallet and he threw a $20 bill in the basket because he was just going to buy his way in. Right, so that he could use jargon. But I did wind up at Virgin. I also discovered what Winston Churchill meant when he said that America and Great Britain are two countries that are separated by a common language. Mm-hmm. Because, and I've told this story on the show before, but the president of Virgin came from the city of London, mm-hmm. and when the developers were building the website, they asked him if he wanted to build the functionality of having a sale. And he said, "Absolutely not. It's not in the Virgin culture." And so they built a website that didn't have the ability to mark down prices for a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. And that's because in the city of London, sale means going out of business, close out. If they had said, "Do you want to be able to build campaigns?" he would have said, "Yes, absolutely." So the Virgin Megastore Online launched without any ability to mark prices down for a period of time.
Well, I will say that's hilarious. I will say I do think it's important to define terms, and I mean this is something in philosophy. You have to agree on the definition. I actually did. I ended up putting it on. I just started a Substack, and I ended up putting it on my Substack because I realized the term socio-Gnosticism was being thrown around. And
which
socio-Gnosticism?
Okay,
it's shorthand for sociological Gnosticism, and that was something I saw that was being thrown around on Twitter. And I'm like, I don't think a lot of people know what this means. So I did. It's a pretty short, just explainer. This is what socio-Gnosticism is. And so I do think that there is a need for kind of explaining, agree upon the definitions. And in philosophy, that's one of the first tenets of philosophy is that you have to define the term. So I think that is important so that you don't build websites where you can't have a sale if you want to have a sale. Right. That might be, it might be hard to build a business where you can't sell things. So Yeah, I think the terms should be defined, and you do need to agree upon them. Now, when you're talking about something like Twitter, though, I think you can set out the terms, but of course, it's ostensibly a public square, so you can't have everybody agree on the terms that you're defining. But you can put out, well, this is what I mean by what I'm saying, and I think that's important to do. But I think I tried to do that. I try not to just speak in, shorthand terms that I haven't defined. And I think that's, yeah, basic kind of literature skills. But
Well, that might be a good segue into the third thing that I'm not sure we have disagreements on, but I do think that maybe you misunderstand me. So I think this is a good place, and that is the current work that I've been doing with linguistics.
Okay.
I had a guest on last show that I did, a guy who I learned a lot of neurolinguistic programming from, a guy who's got a YouTube channel called Mind Titans, and his name is Matteo Morelli. And one of the things that was a giant wake-up call for me, and maybe one of the, 10 most important things I ever learned in my life. I was talking to Matteo, and I was telling him that I wanted to learn neurolinguistic programming, and he wanted to know why. He wanted to know if I wanted to be a therapist. And I said, no, I don't want to be a therapist. And he said, well, do you want to do self-help? Are you trying to lose weight or quit smoking or something? And I said, no, I don't want to learn that either. And he said, well, why do you want to learn it? And I said, because I want to understand how the media and politics has been weaponized.
Yep.
And he said, oh, well, that's easy. And I said, easy? And he said, yeah, because they only use one pattern. They only use one linguistic pattern, basically. And it's something that Gregory Bateson or Noam Chomsky would refer to as a cause-effect complex equivalency. Meaning, I've given it the shorthand because I'm trying to make it simpler for people to understand. If then equals because. But what's interesting, when you start to learn how to recognize that particular pattern, you start to see it everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And for example, Marcus Aurelius, half of the Stoic maxims or axioms, as Matthew Arrett would call it, they all fit into this pattern.
They do. I noticed that, and they have been promulgated like in modern times as like the pinnacle of philosophy. And I'm like, yeah, just because that it's for this exact reason, because they are great propaganda tools.
Right, and when you learn how to recognize just that pattern, then you can get a sense without arguing it. One of the things that I discovered is that ChatGPT is actually very good at. There's a guy named Robert Dilts who was a protege of Gregory Bateson, who wrote a book, who noticed when one of Bateson, another guy that wrote NLP, a guy named Richard Bandler, kept getting stuck in trying to reframe people's ideas. And Dilts was very good at being able to identify exactly what the linguistic issues were. And he wrote a book 25 years ago called Sleight of Mouth, which shows that linguistically that you can reframe you can take any cause-effect complex equivalency, and there are at least 14 different ways to reframe that idea. It doesn't mean that they're right, but it also doesn't mean that the original cause-effect complex equivalence was true either. I mean, a cause-effect complex equivalence can be true. Okay, that doesn't mean it's not true, but because of the language, if it's framed in a certain way, there's always at least 14 other ways that you can look at it. Or it could be restated or reframed or
polysemny. Yeah.
Say again?
Polysemny.
Yeah, I think that's Chomsky. Is that a Chomskyan term?
Term.
Yeah, I think.
He may have the linguist. Yeah, he might
Yeah.
have used that. But that's what it is. It's polysemy. It's like using the one word that has the multiple meanings, and yeah.
Right, and so what I started to discover when I was looking at Marcus Aurelius, and I was going, or half of Aristotle, it's like just like because I said so, right?
Yeah.
The reason that neurolinguistic programming was adopted in the first place by the military was because they looked at things like classical education and the roadmap that it took in order to get somebody to be trained up to be a competent hypnotist. And they thought that the education program up until that point was substandard in getting people trained quickly. And the reason that they went with this linguistic model was because you could get people to a point where they could analyze the language that was being used, see how the words are being put together, and then they could act on those words in an effective way to reframe the people that they were having. So rather than using it like a Tony Robbins kind of way of, doing an open hypnosis kind of group hypnosis
Brainwashing people, essentially.
Brainwashing people.
Yeah.
I think it's a much quicker way to get people to achieve critical thinking skills by simply getting people to be able to recognize when words are put together in a way that may be syntactically correct, but don't make any sense. That is, you can put a sentence together and the words look like they make sense, but they don't actually. But only if you presume that whoever the person is saying whatever it is that they're saying, you're presuming that because Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome and that he has this reputation for being a really smart guy, that if he said something, it must be true.
Right.
Right. I think that one of the promises of linguistics is that I think that the military was right. I think it does get people to a point where they can think critically faster. And rather than looking at trying to put 6 billion people through the trivium and the quadrivium, maybe there's a faster way. So that's my bias, and that's kind of where I'm coming at it from.
So I think that bias works for a certain percentage of people. That would be my argument. So I have a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, the old adage that you have to know the rules before you can break them. And I think for somebody who knows the rules, then that can actually be a great accelerator. And then they can look at this and use it as a tool. It's kind of like they already have the puzzle pieces, and now they have a bird's eye view of how to put it all together. So it can be effective in that regard. I also think, so I actually, one of my first jobs out of college, I was a hypnotherapist. And so I quit after about 9 months because I couldn't be hypnotized and I felt like a fraud. And so I was helping people with things just like, what they asked you, with things like stopping smoking or weight loss or nail biting. I should use it for myself. But that was the problem. I couldn't hypnotize myself. And so I felt like I was just a fraud, even though I was helping other people. And what I've learned since then is that there is a percentage of the population who is resistant to hypnosis. So they tend to be, the divergent, quote unquote, personalities, people who might have a stronger propensity for critical thinking. They're the people who ask all the questions. Yeah, me too. I think that's, I think that's why we're having this conversation.
Indeed.
So, it goes along with that whole, the mass formation psychosis theory. So that really is just a rip off of Laban's work, which was, in 1895. I believe that was 1895. When he wrote The Crowd, and this is all about crowd psychology. And this idea that we have maybe a third, and the third of the population are very suggestible. They're very susceptible to, manipulation of language and to programming, to propaganda, all of that, and to hypnosis in general. And then you've got kind of that more persuadable middle. They might go either way. They're not necessarily going to jump in, but they're suggestible, and you can probably coerce them. And then there's, of course, the people who are just like, wait, WTF? No, this makes no sense to me, and it just doesn't work on them. And I think that for those people, what you're talking about could be more effective, because they're going to look at it with much more critical lens, and they're not necessarily going to be the neuro-linguistic programming isn't being worked on them. They're using it as a tool. They're examining it to look at the processes of how is it, but just like what you did, you said, I want to learn this so that I can recognize the tools that they're using. And if I can learn how this is being done, then I can kind of game it, is essentially what you wanted to do. I just don't think that everybody has, and this, I know that's, I should be a little more optimistic, but I don't think everybody has that capacity.
Well, you are optimistic. You're going to vote.
Well, but my reason for voting is a little bit different. It has to do with, I do think optics matter. And I do think that you have to show that you're fighting the system in order to have any potential to fight the system. You can't just, opt out. They're counting on apathy and abolition. Those are their strongest weapons for being able to, execute their criminality. So it's not all about, oh, well, I just think that there's so much power in it. I think there is power in taking action. And I think
I agree, but you qualified me when you used the universal quantifier just opt out. There's other things between
I
not
would agree
voting
with
and,
that. Okay,
yeah.
that's fair enough.
But again, this is my way of using of my analysis of linguistics. I saw the word just go by and I just grabbed it, and understanding that there are certain words that are used in our everyday conversations, but more importantly, that people on television are using. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And I will just speak to the word just, though, because there are a lot of people who are just doing that. It's been effective on them because there is an active measure. I really do believe there has been an active measure to convince people not to vote. And on many of those people, I would say that first portion, the first third, who are very susceptible to hypnosis, for them, they are just opting out. It's like, oh, well, I have no power. I'm just, opting. There are other people who may say, wait, maybe this isn't the best strategy, and there are other things that we can do. And I'm all about people creating parallel systems and creating resistance movements, especially at the local level, decentralized kind of systems. I'm definitely in favor of them. But I think that most people are just opting out. And that's unfortunately exactly what the people who are fomenting this active measure want. And that's why I say we should not just sit back. And I think we need to take some sort of action. But yeah.
I hear you loud and clear, and I'm reminded of a couple of different things, and we can probably then transition over into theosophy, because I can tie what we're talking about right now into theosophy a little bit. But the idea is that I'm reminded of Mike Cernovich's interview on 60 Minutes, where Scott Pelley was questioning why he would think that Hillary Clinton was unhealthy when she fell down on the September 11th event that she fell down at, and he went through a litany of reasons why he believed that, and Scott Pelley said, well, but she's not sick. He just kind of restated it by saying, well, she's not sick. And Mike said, well, how do you know that? And he said, because the campaign told us. And Mike said, well, why would you believe that?
Yeah.
Okay. And the interesting thing is I was, when I met Andrew Breitbart, when I first met Ben Shapiro, when I watched Mike Cernovich do that, I've always been, or when Ann Coulter goes on to Bill Maher's show, I'm always kind of marveling at how they can maintain their cool and then figure out a way to come back when when everybody on the stage is going after them, right?
Right.
And it occurred to me that the attack is doctrinal. And let me bring up a slide here. 1 second. I think I've got that I can. This is my if then equals because. Mm-hmm. So if we understand that most of the bullshit, let's just call it bullshit, that gets sold to us
has a very highfalutin term, yes.
Okay, has this same linguistic pattern. All right. The reason that we wind up believing this is because, let me it's because either it's coming from an authority. Mm-hmm. Or we have faith in the authority.
Right.
I mean, we use the word faith often to refer to it as religiously, but people had faith in Anthony Fauci, right? That he was telling us the right thing. And so that's
the expert. He is the science.
Yeah. Right, the authority, and I have another version of this where I just call it the authority, right? Yeah. But the reason that I choose faith when I do this is because I think that what winds up happening is that if you understand that this is a basic building block of belief systems, okay, what I'm writing about right now is that I'm calling this the basic building block of belief systems, that the easiest way to shake people, and I could bring it back to voting and being effective and the word just, I'm going to bring it all together here, is that if you shake people's faith, okay, then then it's easier to shake their faith than it is to convince them that whatever the reasons are for their believing something are wrong. And that one of my critiques of the Lindsay style of point for point debate is that when you're having that kind of a debate, you're on the top line here of this formula. But what winds up becoming a much simpler and more devastating attack is if you knock the faith out. If you, for whatever reason people believe whatever it is that they believe, if you can cause them to, I see the name Rushbo in the chat. I don't know why Rushbo is there, but I was a big Rush Limbaugh fan, and I read a book called Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare in the New World Order by Servando Gonzalez. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that book, he points out that he's got a litmus test for determining whether or not people are people being honest about how society is being manipulated. And his litmus test was, do they ever mention the Council on Foreign Relations? Mm-hmm. Right? Does Tucker Carlson ever mention the Council on Foreign Relations? Okay.
He's a member of the Pilgrim Society, so he's not going to, but
Right. So I didn't know that, but yes, that would be a good reason why he
I don't know if he still is, but as of 2002 and I believe 2004, he still was. I don't have the records of recent, but yeah.
Right. So when I read that, in Servando Gonzalez's book, mm-hmm. my faith in Rush Limbaugh became mitigated. Like I started looking at Rush Limbaugh a little bit differently. Mark Levin and Sean Hannity and all these other guys that I used to listen to. Yeah. And I started thinking, I don't know that I have faith that they're telling me the whole truth and nothing but the truth when they get on the air. So so the reason I thought that I could bring this back to theosophy for a second is because I read a book. It's two books by David Wemhoff, and that Jay Dyer turned me on to, which is John Courtney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition. And that book is all about the doctrinal warfare that the CIA and Henry Luce were involved in creating basically a crisis of faith within the Catholic Church. And again, I think that if we understand that this is like the structure, that you can argue things point per point on the top line, or you can just find a way to destroy the faith on the bottom line and have a much more devastating impact, then theosophy to me, not unlike Mormonism or Scientology or arguably Methodism or the Chautauqua movement or any of those other Protestant religious kind of spin-off movements, they're all about doing two things actually: permeation, okay, using I'm just like you, only I'm a little different kind of approach to get in, and then once they get in, then they get you to bite the apple, right? So it all goes back to the garden, right? Dialectics. Eve was the first. Satan going into the garden. That was the first dialectic, right? That's it. Come on. You think that you've got a perfect thing. There's a much better thing here. Just bite the apple. That's all you need to do. Oh yeah, and get your buddy to do that too. You know, it'll all work out. So anyway, so that's where that's just like getting back to this. This is where I think theosophy comes in. I understand they want to replace all religion with their religion. They want to have one religion. Okay, so they're going to tell everybody, hey, we've got something in here for everybody. But at the end of the day, they have a really hard road to hoe, because they have to destroy people's faith and then they have to build it back up again. And I'm not sure how you do that.
Well, I don't think they destroy people's faith. I think they work within. They destroy from within. So it's much more similar to, if you think about politically, like fascism. They infiltrate through the institution and they take it over. And that's really more aligned with how I see the theosophists. I don't really see them as destroying their faith. Most of the time, it's it's like a big soup. So they claim they accept all of the faiths. Just come in, and like you said, we're a little bit different, but you're all welcome. And so they lure you all in. Although they do say they're diametrically opposed to Christianity and traditional Judaism, so they don't seem to be welcome. But everybody else is welcome. So I think it's. But what they do is they deceive. So they use an exoteric veneer that may look like Christianity, using what I call Christianese. So the language looks like it's very Christian, things like Christ consciousness. But it's, of course, they have a very different, talk about polysemy. They have a different meaning. There's the exoteric veneer and esoteric messaging. And then underneath that, there is the esoteric meaning behind what they're saying, and that only applies to the initiated. Only they know what it is. So I think that that's more aligned with how they operate, rather than tearing down and build back better. Although tearing down and building back better.
Well, specifically, I think what I'm talking about is the Catholic Church. I think that they're trying to tear down the Catholic Church. No?
I think they're trying to infiltrate and take it over. I'm not so sure. I think they are pretty far along with that already. I think that, they're working within it, and then they're trying to create kind of an integralist movement, which is, this interfaith, interpolitical operation. So that's, and they are using kind of symbols that speak to traditional faith, but that have an esoteric meaning behind it. So I don't think that they're tearing down. I think they're infiltrating and destroying from within.
Okay, well, maybe I'm just being I'm substituting metaphor in my way of presenting it. In any case,
Yes. But it's definitely being co-opted. I agree with you on that.
I mean, looking at Christianity like on a teleological kind of level, I see, or I looking at dialectics. Dialectics to me is, again, and you can accuse me of oversimplifying, but again, my job for 30 years was to take complex ideas and try to figure out a way to present them to people in a way that they would understand.
Yeah.
I worked for 3 years on this museum project, and I had 700 scientific exhibits that needed to be shown to school children. And the writers would bring the scripts in, and we'd have writers meetings. And my comments were always, I had a cliche that I always used to use, which was keep it stupid, smarty pants. How do I
Right.
like how do we what?
I'm all for simplifying a concept to make them because I think that's like if somebody who really understands something should be able to make it accessible and explain it to a 5-year-old. So it's that's not what I'm opposed to. What I'm opposed to is when we're talking to people who are already in the conversation and having to dumb everything down, because now instead of people doing the work to enter the conversation, now you've lowered the bar of the conversation. And I think that's kind of what our education system has already done. So I see that as a microcosm of the macro problem. So that's what I have a problem with. I don't have a problem with taking a difficult concept and explaining it, reducing it into simple terms that are accessible to a wide scale. That's there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's great.
Well, at the risk of being accused of oversimplifying.
Okay.
I think that ultimately what we're dealing with is an enemy who has a divide and conquer strategy, and that dialectics is just it's a form of divide and conquer. Yeah. And that if you take a look at the teleological or the epistemological lessons of the Sermon on the Mount and the Gospels, it's all about undoing divide and conquer. It's about instead of divide and conquer, it's love your neighbor, right? Okay,
right.
It's like don't kill them, embrace them. Let's figure out a way to work this thing out. And ultimately, I think I think love your neighbor and the golden rule are so antithetical to the divide and conquer strategy that they have to destroy that. Because it prevents them from achieving what it is that they want. And ultimately, that's the battleground between the state and the self, between the Kant and the Declaration of Independence or Hegel and the Declaration of Independence is that divide and conquer versus love your neighbor kind of approach. And I know that that's a radical oversimplification, and I know that there's millions of pages that have been written on both sides. But that's kind of what I'm trying to aim at this point is just to get people to say, and this is why I don't know, there's been a lot of conversations about the woke right the last couple of weeks, and it's like, okay, great. We've identified those people. That's understood. What are we going to do in order to bring them back in the fold? What are we going to, because they're being led by bad ideas.
Yeah, they are being led by bad ideas. So let's first address what you said, this idea of the love your neighbor versus divide and conquer. I do see that they're definitely in opposition. However, what do the theosophists do? They're very deceptive. I always talk about the enemy has a trinity that they worship, and it's the triple D's. So there's the first one is deception, right? This is they deceive, they distort, and this is how they lure you in. They entice you, right? Theosophy is a great example of this. The deception of love and light, Who can argue with love and light? Do you not want love and light? But they want the plan of love and light to work out. What is that plan? What is the work that they're referencing? It may not be quite as loving and as light as it appears. So that's the first D. The second one is division, divide and conquer. And of course, this is the Hegelian dialectic, because oftentimes that division is not real. That division has a shared telos. They're, creating these false binaries that you can choose between the red team, the blue team, but ultimately their agenda marches on and the dialectic progresses. And then the last one would be destruction. This is why they're the death cult, because they can't create, right? Satan can only destroy. And so when I look at it that way, when you see the love thy neighbor and then the divide and conquer, the theosophists, and this is a wide tent because, of course, this encompasses like the re-enchantment movement, the new thought. This is really this whole esoteric kind of big umbrella tent soup that they're trying to create. But they have a shared vision in that we need to return to the undifferentiated all, right? We need to return to source is what the theosophists call it. But that umbrella will say that it is all about loving thy neighborhood. Not by neighbor, sorry. It is about, creating this brotherhood of man, that we are all one. There is no difference between you and me. And we have a shared consciousness. And that is, but the thing that they leave out of all of that is that if you do not evolve, if you do not join the noosphere, to use their terms, if you don't join that, and then you get subsumed or recycled or you die, you're just you're cast out. And so although it's under the guise of being very peaceful, right? These are the same people who tell us we need to have war in order to achieve peace. So I would say that I don't disagree with you, except that it can be a little bit misleading, because the very people who are telling us that unity and that they love their neighbor are the very people who are fomenting the divide and conquer, and who are creating this strata of the elite Psychian class who, they're consciously evolved and we are not. And so if you disagree, then you just get recycled into the plan. And so, yeah.
So what's the solution?
Okay, so and then you talked about like the woke right also, and so they are being led by bad ideas, and I would argue that a lot of them are being deceived. They're being, and I mean, some of them, there's always the kind of witting operatives, who know, and they're being very, they're being enticed. That CIA document, The Mice to Rascals?
I do, and I've written about it a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's
I got turned on to that, in 2015 by a CIA guy who was my business partner for 4 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so
this is how I learned. I didn't realize that journalism is kindergarten for spooks. What you find out very quickly if you're in any place where you're surrounded by effective people, that this is how I know Peter Thiel, how I've met Eric Prince, all of the other spooky people in the world, Palmer Luckey. How do I know all of these people? Because I was a business partner with a journalist.
Right. Yeah. And that's the key. Well,
indeed. But I did mean what I said. I mean, what's the solution? Because because one of the things that I want to leave you with today, if nothing else, is the idea that I have decades of experience in taking complex ideas and making them simple for people to consume. But as Evan Brown pointed out so eloquently to me a couple weeks ago, and it's something, if you go to the DukeReport.com and you go to the lower right-hand corner of the homepage there, the number one thing is 7 things that you need to know in order to make your creative project a a success. And for 20 years of my career, I did nothing except ask the same 7 questions. So if you want a career as a creative director, you can go and read those. But audience is a key thing, and understanding who your audience is. And part of the reason it's a rhetorical question when I ask who's our audience, because I'm going through the same thing right now. I launched my Substack a month or 2 ago, and because George Webb, who I do this show with, normally, I think that George didn't want to do the show with me for the next month because he understands that I'm disengaged from the election, and he wants to be completely engaged in the election for the next month. And I totally respect that, and that's totally that's okay. But
I do think we should be focused. We should get Trump in, and then we have to hold his feet to the fire.
I think that Trump will probably get in, and I don't know if it has anything to do with any voters.
Okay. Well,
so
I don't have the crystal ball, but
I don't either. But I can tell you that my blood pressure went down when I unregistered to vote. But that said, one of the things I had mentioned to Christine Jones is that on Substack you can create different sections of your website.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, maybe an idea is to just create the different versions of James Lindsay might be the best person to do this, but take your best ideas and then have GPT translate them to high school seniors. I did that with one of Christine's tweets a couple of days ago, and you said that you liked her tweet better than the GPT tweet.
I did personally. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, you don't have to apologize. GPT did it, so you can't really hurt their feelings. Okay, but one of the things that GPT is really good at is that you could say, explain this in a way that would be understandable to somebody who was a high school senior. And in that way, I think that there are probably different ways that we can take the same content. Because
which high school senior are we talking to, right?
You're the one that GPT picks, but the thing is, you can be more specific. I
get it. Look, I think technology can be a great tool. I'm not opposed to using technology, but I do think we come into a broader kind of a problem when technology becomes the primary, and when we are
100%.
And when you talk about who is the audience, now I think this is a great question. I think for each person, they do need to recognize who is their audience, and for not for everybody should their audience be a high school student or a 5-year-old, and maybe not everybody should be the master's level. But I do think we need to have all of those, because the conversation does need to be happening on many levels, and the reason for that is because there's on the opposing side. So if we're looking at the two sides here, I always say that it's the parasite class versus team humanity. The parasite class would like to create humanity 2.0. I personally would like to see humanity 1.0 preserved, because 2.0 is looking a little weird to me.
1.0 is fine.
Let's keep humanity. We're flawed, and I'm okay with that. But I kind of like all of our foibles, and I would like to see it remain. So that I'm not saying that people shouldn't work on themselves and do whatever they can to improve themselves. But as far as a species, I think we can stay with humanity 1.0. But so it's kind of this parasite class versus does humanity even remain? Because they are talking about creating a superorganism of humanity, in which, humanity really, as we know it, ceases to exist. And so I see it as those are kind of the competing factions. And the people who are trying to foment and create humanity 2.0, which is arguably a transhuman agenda, are operating on so many different levels. They're working at targeting the kids. They're working on targeting the high schoolers. They're working at the think tanks. They're working at the upper echelons of academia, the intelligence network. I mean, they're working everywhere. And so I think we need to have multiple target audiences as well. Not everybody needs to be targeting one audience. I don't know. Does that?
No, I agree. And I guess the one comment that I would have about the people who haven't leveled up is that we've all read you and I have read Charlotte Iserbyt. Okay, we've read John Taylor Gatto. We've read Anthony Sutton. We know how the Carnegies and the Rockefellers attacked the education system. How about we've read the Poison Loving Cup, and we know how the Rhodes Scholars have gone in and rewritten all of the history books. We understand that sports ball, right, is part of a larger program of distracting people and keeping people's focus and attention, which is part of hypnosis, directed in areas where it may not be serving the best interest of the people who are engaging in it. It may serve Doritos and Budweiser, but it's not necessarily serving the people who are watching it. So, I raised my daughter, and I understood when I was going through that whole elementary school, junior high school trajectory with her, how much of your time as an adult, as a functioning adult, is directed, in that way. And so I don't really blame these people who want to vote for a politician like Trump and have all of their problems solved for them.
Well, I don't think he'll solve all the problems.
I don't even think he'll solve. I don't think he's going to solve a tenth of them. Okay, and again, that's.
I'm hoping he might buy us a little time. Is kind of what I'm hoping, and that would be good.
I hope so. I hope we make it to the election. I'm not completely convinced.
My fiance's with you on that. He doesn't think there's going to be an election.
I'm not completely convinced there's going to be an election. I'm not completely convinced on November 5th that Donald Trump and Kamala Harris will still be here. I wouldn't. If I were them, I wouldn't go into the same building together. Like. But in any case, the point that I'm trying to make about audience is that, I think that at some point, there probably is an opportunity to take a lot of the things that we're figuring out. Part of what I've been doing on my Substack is that I've been taking books. I take books and I run them through this summary routine. And if the author is dead, I'm posting the summaries. If the author is still alive, I want you to go buy his book. But in any case, I think. In any case, I am sharing the scripts that I'm using, the prompts that I'm using, because I think that there is an opportunity for every kind of little space, whether or not it's the TikTok space or the Instagram story space or the Substack space. I think that we can take this information and we can synthesize it in a way that it's acceptable to different people. And so when I'm making my suggestions on Twitter, I'm not trying to say, hey, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm just
Well, we're friends. I don't think everybody should agree on everything. And my mission is to preserve free will, which means that we won't agree on everything. I'm okay with that. I just want to see that that the people who are trying to eradicate free will, that they don't win. That's my hope. So
ditto. And I actually think that this was probably a pretty good show today because we had a list of things. I had a list of things that you and I have disagreed on, and I think that makes. I think that's entertaining, and I think that Plato said that that's how you get to truth, right?
Mm-hmm. That was what the original, the term dialectic, it came from the dialogues, and this was this Socratic method, not the idea of, although Plato's, allegory of the cave was, I would argue the dividing line was one of the original dialectical processes. But, the idea of a Socratic method and having this discourse back and forth, I think is how people learn. And I think it's rather than being, again, we go back to the Do you teach people how to fish, or do you just give them a bunch of fish?
Right, and that's where, again, getting back to the NLP thing for a second. Somebody had a question. Somebody said, wouldn't you just describe just? There's that just word, universal quantifier. That's a universal quantifier. Go look that up. Would you just describe NLP as a modern term for rhetoric? No, because rhetoric, I think, operates on the level of reason, and linguistics runs on the level of mechanics. That is, one is about the idea. Rhetoric is more about the idea, and linguistics is about what the function of the word is that's being used. And the difference is the difference is linguistics you can learn faster. That's what the Army figured out. You can learn linguistics much faster. You can learn to recognize a word just. And I don't, here, I'll put this back and use it as an example. Caravaggio said, would you just describe NLP as a modern term for rhetoric? I don't have to know anything about NLP, modern terms, or rhetoric to come back at you and just say just, right? Because when somebody uses a universal quantifier, you don't actually, if somebody said all women are bitches, okay, you wouldn't have to know what a woman was, like a Supreme Court justice, right? You wouldn't have to know what a bitch was, okay? You could come back and say all of them? Question mark?
Right.
Like, okay, you don't have to know that. So, but that said, being able to recognize the mechanics of the way that the expression is put together is a way to get to a point where you are actively listening. And getting back to the Plato, Aristotle of it, the dialogue versus the axiom idea, that one of the things that you have to do in order to learn neurolinguistic programming or understand linguistics is that you have to become an active listener. And I think that becoming active, and this is what my show with Matteo Morelli was about a couple of days ago, and that is when you become an active listener, I do think that you're engaging critical thinking, whether or not you think you're engaging it.
No, I agree. My only concern is that it's kind of like replacing phonics. So you already have phonics. You already have the building blocks. You already understand rhetoric. And so now you can go back, learn linguistics, and you can use that as a tool. But if somebody doesn't have phonics and they're using the look-see method, now they're not able to, they may now be able to functionally read, but they don't have the tools to be able to piece things together. And that actually erodes a aspect of their critical thinking skills. So it's a facet that is lost. And so that's my concern with it. And now there are some people who I think you give them that, even if they don't have the foundational tools, they're going to be able to use the linguistics, the way, and apply it the way that you do. Some people have that capacity, that aptitude to do that. But I think the majority of people who don't have the first layer, there are people who can learn, they can learn multiplication without having learned arithmetic. And they will, as a byproduct of doing multiplication, they'll actually figure out arithmetic. That's not the majority of people. Most people will need to learn how to add and subtract, then they can learn how to multiply and divide, then they can learn algebra. You have to go through these steps. I can give you this example in something completely different. I'm an aerial artist. I'm an aerial acrobat. And I came into aerial arts through, I was training for American Ninja Warrior at the time. And I actually did it because I have very small hands. And so I knew that I was going to have to compensate for lack of surface area in my grip, which can add to grip strength by building more grip strength. And so I picked up aerial arts as a way to build grip strength because it looked like a fun way to do it rather than doing like just grip exercises, which seemed kind of boring to me. And so I learned aerial arts, but I came into it with most people when they start aerial, they don't have a lot of especially women don't have a whole lot of upper body strength. That's not something, naturally that we tend to be more dominant in. So, but I came into it having built that strength already, but I didn't have the technique. And so a lot of the classes I would jump into, they're like, "Oh, you're strong, you can do this." But I didn't know the basics. And so I never learned the terms, like just even the jargon again. Like I didn't learn the basic terms for things, what things were called. I didn't learn the, foundational movements that build the sequences. And so I just jumped in. And so even now, as a fairly proficient aerial acrobatic artist, I know we're talking about something totally different, but I think it applies. I jump in and it's like, I have no clue what these, so I can't piece things together. It's much harder for me to make my own. I don't have the technique. That's really what it is. I have the strength, but not the technique. And I can get by. And I mean, I can do decent performances. But if I had learned the technique first, I was able to jump in because I had other things that I could apply to it. I had the strength. I had a foundation in gymnastics, which I kind of, applied. I had partner acrobatics, which kind of transfers. So I had all these other ways of being able to transfer onto aerial, but I never actually learned the technique. And I think technique is your building block. So I see it kind of the same way.
And I'll just finish by saying that one of the kind of breakthroughs that I've had, people ask me, "Are you a hypnotist?" And I say no. And the reason that I'm not a hypnotist is because, to your point about aerial acrobatics, it requires practice. Mm-hmm. That is, what's required in order to be a hypnotist is that you have to be an active listener. B, you have to have an intent. You have to have a place that you want to move the other person to.
Sure.
Then you have to have a strategy for asking questions because, again, getting back to the Socratic method, as it were, good hypnotists ask questions. That's their main tool.
That's how you engage them, right? You let them in. Yep.
Right. It's how you get somebody to a subjective state is by asking them questions. And to that end, one of the things that I think is important about linguistics, and it's why I keep coming back to it, is that I think that you can get to a point where you understand, which was the original point that I reached out to Matteo Morelli in the first place, because I've gotten there. I understand this, that you can get to a point where if you understand linguistics well enough, you can recognize it. That person used the word just. Okay. Mm-hmm. I recognized it as a universal quantifier. I know how to deal with universal quantifiers. When you're watching the debates, when you're watching somebody say something and they're putting together a cause-effect complex equivalency, then you don't even really have to pay that much attention to what it is that they just said, just to understand that linguistically what they just said may or may not be true, and there are at least 14 different ways that you can reframe whatever it is that idea. I troll the Council on Foreign Relations all the time, because every third tweet out of the Council on Foreign Relations on the Foreign Affairs Twitter feed is a cause-effect complex equivalency. Mm-hmm. Like, and it's like, do you guys think that this works? Peter Thiel's Palladium magazine. Do you think this works? Like, once you get to a point where you can recognize the pattern, at least you can understand where the playing field is. You can see all the pieces. You can listen to somebody make a speech. I can't even think of who the last person I did this with, but I couldn't even watch the vice presidential debates because it's just one cause-effect complex equivalency against another cause-effect complex equivalency, and they're talking past each other. And at that point, it becomes really boring. Like, it's not very fun. So anyway, we've been going for an hour and a half. Thank you so much for having this discussion with me today. I sincerely appreciate it, and I hope that we've sorted out our stuff and we can continue to go at each other on Twitter.
I look forward.
But I want everyone to know that I love Courtenay and I love what she does, and I think that her work is brilliant. and keep doing it. And some of those guys who you have on your show should probably listen to you more than talk at you. That would be good. But in any case, where do people find you, and what do you want to leave people with?
So I'll start with what I want to leave people with, because you did ask about like what are the solutions.
Yeah.
I do think solutions are really important. I am very solution oriented. I don't claim to have all the answers. I always said my tagline is that I want to inform, inspire, and empower. And really, that is my hope, is that by providing information, it's not to give you fish. It is so that you will then take that and run with it and go do your own research, your own digging. If it means you need to take a dictionary, you might learn some new words, and that's awesome. So I'm all for that. And then hopefully it will inspire you to take some action where you feel empowered. Like you do have personal agency. We do have free will, and that comes with responsibility, and it means you have to exercise it. So that is my mission. I think that's a huge part of the solution. A huge part of the solution is to help foster cognitive liberty. It is to build critical thinking. It is for people to take action locally. I always tell people, get involved in whatever it is you're passionate about. That is like kind of the, that's the clue to where you could possibly be of value. I believe that we were all endowed with unique gifts, strengths, and talents, and it's incumbent upon each of us to discover those, hone those, and that's how we can be of contribution to society, to the world. And so I think our passions kind of lead us towards in those directions. And I think 2020 was a great example. We talked a lot about education. We saw the mama bears wake up. They realized what their kids were being taught at school. They said, oh, no, we don't want that. And some of them started homeschooling or finding other ways to inculcate the values they wanted to see and the material they wanted to see their children learn. So they got involved in school boards or whatever it may be. Some people are passionate about, what's happening with the food and the terraforming of our entire land and, the synthetic food that they're creating. And so they get involved in that, in the farming, and there's no shortage of things to take action. But in the information sphere, we are bombarded with propaganda and with psychological warfare. And I think sometimes just pointing out an op, yes, you might get some backlash back and forth, but it does diffuse it. If people can recognize what the op is, then it loses power. And so I think it is incumbent upon people when they see an op, and even if they don't know for sure, to call it out. Obviously don't just call it out, with no backing. I think, use some sort of evidence to substantiate your argument. I try to do that even when I can't prove something. I'll say, hey, here are the data points. This is where my conjecture is derived. And you go do your own research, make up your own mind. If we can develop tools, I think it's less about dumbing down the language than it is about defining the terms that we use, so that we're not speaking in code. It's not creating our own initiated club. It's about, hey, this is a term. I recognize it might be jargon. This is what it means. And then we can go from there. We can continue the conversation using that, as the definition that we've agreed upon, or at least I've told you this is from where I'm operating. And
Understood. Yeah. I think that one shortcut, though, that I've been using lately is just when somebody tells me something that I disagree with, I simply ask them the question, why do you believe that?
Yeah, I'm all for that. Definitely. Put the onus on them, make them, present the prudent first, the burden of proof, and justify why it is they believe what they believe or think what they think. And I think it also engages. I just did the show I did right before this was with Carl Teichgrib, and he said that this was actually how there were epiphanies that occurred with people who had very different opinions, people who were of the more theosophical type mindset, and they were able to have real conversations that are continuing now currently, and it was because, well, why do you believe that? What, you keep asking the question. And I found this too. This works even in the political realm. You would ask them to prove their position, and I think that's a very effective. And
Right.
yeah.
Again, asking why attacks the bottom of the equation here, and
Yeah.
and like I said, with linguistics, a lot of times you don't actually even have to know anything about the equation. That said, thanks for joining me today, Courtney, and thanks everybody for watching. And we'll see you again.
I'll just tell them, find me at CourtenayTurner.com.
Yeah, it's right there on the screen, and it's right below you. And we'll talk to you again, Courtney. I'll see you on Twitter.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.